I'm Jolene Wynn, and this is the Porn Addict's Wife podcast, episode number 115, Conflict and Confrontation. Your life does not have to revolve around your husband's pornography addiction. You are not defined by his choices or by what he sees on the screen. You are not just the porn addict's wife. You are so much more. In this podcast, I'm going to teach you how to go from handling it to healed, because I've been where you are and you don't have to stay there. My name is Jolene Wynn. I'm a member of the LDS faith, a certified life coach, and a wife of a former porn addict. And this is a podcast for the porn addict's wife. Hello, my ladies. How are you? How's your summer going? I hope it's going great. I love to hear from you guys. So if you guys wouldn't mind, my birthday is in August, and as an early birthday present, I have a request. You guys ready? It's super simple. I would be so honored if you guys would go leave a rating and a review on iTunes, okay? All you have to do is go into your podcast app right where you go every single week, and you scroll down, you hit onto the podcast icon, you click on the show, the Porn Addict's Wife podcast, and then you scroll down and it says tap to leave. All you have to do is tap to leave a rating, and then you can also leave a review. And I would love it if you guys would leave a review for me. This helps iTunes to show the podcast to more people. And then if you guys have ever listened to a podcast, I do this, I don't always read reviews, but I do when I'm buying stuff from Amazon, and I do when I'm going to start listening to a new podcast, because I want to know if it's actually going to do what I think it's going to do. Okay. So if you guys have found the podcast helpful at all, I would love it if you would go leave a rating and a review. And you can, again, leave it anonymous. You don't have to put your name, but just go say something so that the next woman who is in your shoes and wants to know if this is even worth her time tapping into, maybe she'll read your review and she'll give it a shot, and maybe it will help her, even if it gives her a thought. Or if you hate the podcast, go leave that review too. I've had those too. It's helpful for other people to hear it, okay? So just go leave a rating and review on iTunes. I would absolutely love it, and think of it as an early birthday present to me. That would be amazing, okay? Also, if there's someone in your life who struggles with this in their life as well. If you know somebody that their husband is struggling with pornography use, then I would encourage you guys to just shoot them a message with the link to the podcast. And it can just be the initial one where I'm talking about my story, right? Or maybe shoot them your favorite. And you don't even have to know, you don't even have to tell them that you're also in the same boat, but if they've confided in you, then this could be something that you just offer them and say, hey, I heard this today, or I saw it, and I thought of you, and I thought maybe it could be helpful for you. And you don't even have to say, hey, my husband struggles with this too. If you don't want to, it's totally fine. But I think that would be super amazing. And I think we all know of at least one person. It was fascinating when I first started coaching. I decided to take 10 women. Before I coached one-on-one, I created my online modules, and I was like, okay, I need 10 women to go through this program and to get feedback and to practice coaching and all of these things. And so I thought, I don't know that I even know of 10 women that are struggling with this. At the time, I had just barely started my podcast, and I was just trying to think of people that I knew personally. And it was a crazy exercise to try and come up with 10 women. But guess what? I did. I knew 10 women that were struggling with this, and I invited them, and it was such a great experience. Anyway, I was just thinking today how amazing it would be if each of you guys really just took a moment, if you know of somebody, to just pass it along, and maybe it will help them. So we'll see. All right, ladies, today I want to talk to you guys about conflict and confrontation. This is fascinating to me because this is something that has come up recently in my life, actually from my sister. As you guys know, I have a twin sister, and she's amazing and everything I want to be when I grow up. And she had an experience where there was a lot of conflict in her life, and it happened to her professionally, and it was actually going on at the same time as we were having some conflict in our immediate family. And it was fascinating because this was at the same time we were learning about conflict in church. We were talking about David and Goliath at the time. This was a couple of weeks ago. And in Sunday school, we were talking about David and Goliath, which is a conflict between the Philistines, right, and the people, God's people, right, the Hebrews. And so we were talking all about conflict in our lives. And then she got assigned in our church, individuals from the congregation get assigned to speak. They get asked to speak. You can totally say no. But she was asked to speak. She said yes. And they said, we would love it if you would talk about conflict resolution. And it was a fascinating thing for her to look at. And then I learned so much from it just from discussing this with her. And so I wanted to bring it onto the podcast today because I think as moms, as wives, and especially as the wife of someone who struggles with pornography use, there are so many instances where there is conflict. Okay. So think of a situation in your life where there's been conflict. Typically we think of conflict as probably a verbal altercation, right? But I want to offer that that's not necessarily what it is. When you have conflict between two people, it's typically, I believe this thing, you believe that thing. We don't see eye to eye, and therefore we are in conflict. Now, sometimes conflict results or leads to confrontation, okay? But these are two different things, okay? So stay with me. The conflict itself doesn't always lead to confrontation. This is when sometimes it just leads to holding a grudge. It all depends on how you want to approach the conflict. So let's say you are in conflict with another person. You want to do one thing, your husband wants to do another. Let's say like going out to dinner. You want to do one thing, you want to go one place, your husband wants to go somewhere else. You guys are in conflict because you guys don't agree, okay? Now, there are so many options for what you could do next. You could just say, forget it. I don't want to be in conflict anymore. We'll just do what you want to do. And maybe that's not even in a passive aggressive kind of way, but maybe it's just, yeah, totally fine. Let's go where you want to go. Then the conflict is resolved, right? You have resolved the conflict by just dropping one side. So now you both agree, or you just acquiesced to his side. Does this make sense? You could also sit there and continue the conflict, and that might escalate to confrontation. You might have a verbal altercation. It might not necessarily be a fight, but maybe you have a good-natured ribbing about which restaurant is better and which one you like more and why the other one should see eye to eye with you, why the other person should give up what they think in order to agree with you. Now, again, our brain does this because our brain always wants to be right. Okay, so our brain thinks I'm right, they're wrong, they should see it my way, because if I drop mine, that means I'm wrong and he's right. Okay, and this is not what our brain wants. Okay, so again, even with this simple example of going out to dinner and not knowing where to go, that conflict is there until it is resolved, whether we acquiesce or whether we have this verbal altercation, right? There's a confrontation involved, but it's not always solved simply with confrontation. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it stalls, right? Have you guys ever had an argument, maybe not necessarily about going out to dinner, but have you guys ever had an argument where you just kind of stalemate and the conflict is still there even though there's been a confrontation? Have you guys ever had that? Then typically it stalls, you put it on pause, and then you come back to it. Maybe either when you've both calmed down and you're able to see things a little bit differently, or maybe till the other person just chooses to give up, or whatever it is, right? But sometimes a conflict requires confrontation in order to have a resolution. Okay? Think about your husband's pornography addiction. This is a conflict, right? This is, he's doing this thing and I don't like it. There's a conflict, okay? And whether or not he's choosing to do it and he doesn't mind it and he thinks it's fine is irrelevant, okay? Here's this thing that he's doing that I disagree with. That puts us in conflict, okay? Now, sometimes this requires confrontation, and that's okay. I think a lot of times, especially as women, we tend to be super passive aggressive and we tend to not want to do the confrontation part because of all the emotions that it brings up in the process, okay? So we will just instead try to pretend it's not there. We shove it down. We pretend we're fine. We say, yes, I do trust him, even though we don't. We say, it's fine, I don't care, and yet we do. This tends to leading us to feel very bitter, very resentful, very angry, and we tend to hold grudges, right? Ladies, this is what we tend to do. Not all of us, right? But I think most of us at times have done this, okay? Because we don't want the confrontation. We would rather not have the argument. We would rather not have the verbal altercation. We would rather not face all the feelings that we feel when we have the uncomfortable conversation. We'd rather just avoid it. It's easier. I don't want to bring it up. I don't want to make waves. You guys ever thought that? I don't want to make waves. I don't want to, what it was like when you throw a pebble and it makes ripples. It's like, I don't want to disturb the water. I don't want to change. Everything's going well. So let's just I'm just going to sweep this under the rug and pretend it's not happening because I don't want things to change. I don't want to disrupt the status quo, right? That is us trying to avoid confrontation. But here's the problem. Okay, you guys ready? When there is a conflict outside of us or a conflict that is between us and someone else, the bigger issue is that it creates an internal conflict. So let's talk about that. Internal conflict is when we have cognitive dissonance. Okay, this can be this, right? Cognitive dissonance, when we believe two opposing things, when we have something we agree with, and then we also kind of agree with something else. We have two opposite thoughts, opposing thoughts. And that conflict, that internal conflict is still going to be there until we confront it. Okay, sweeping it under the rug, burying it, pretending it's not there doesn't actually make it go away. All it does is really make it fester. Okay, all it does is make it stay there longer. Okay, just like when you are in conflict with someone else, trying to pretend like you're not, trying to pretend like you agree with them, like you don't have anything wrong with them, like you don't have bitter feelings toward them, doesn't make the bitterness go away. It just festers into something even worse. Right? Do you guys see what I'm saying? So when we have this internal conflict that mirrors the external conflict, we have to resolve the internal conflict in order for the external conflict to be resolved as well. And what that really means is facing the emotions that come up. Okay? So often what happens when we have an internal conflict, when we have that cognitive dissonance, what we want to do is exactly what we want to do with other people. Okay, so we have two opposing thoughts. The easiest thing that our brain thinks to do is that we just drop one of them, right? If I have two seemingly opposite beliefs, let me just drop one and that poof, problem solved, conflict resolved. Now the conflict is no longer there because now I've just decided to let go of one of them. Do you guys see that? Again, let's do an example. This comes up so often. I love my husband and yet I don't think he should be watching porn. It's very difficult to hold both. Okay, so often what our brain will think is, well, I just need to pretend like I'm fine with him watching porn, and that way the conflict goes away, right? That's what our brain believes. If I just get rid of this belief, then there's nothing in conflict, and so then I'm fine. Okay, I see this happen so often, especially with spiritual or religious matters, is that often when people have some spiritual belief and then there's something that kind of questions it, what they want to do is just drop one of them so that the questioning goes away. Does this make sense? Now, one of the things that's easiest, rather than trying to work through or resolve or even accept that you believe two opposing things, it's much easier to just get rid of one of them. It's less complicated. Okay, it might not be easy, but it's less complicated. It's very simple. I believe two opposing things. If I just get rid of one of them, then the conflict, the internal discomfort of believing these two opposing things goes away. So it's very appealing to do that. This is when your kids come up and ask you to do the same thing 97 times and you said no, 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 no. And eventually you just get so aggravated that you're just like, fine, whatever. Right? Did your mom ever tell you that? Have you ever told your kids that in that tone of voice? They ask you again and again and again and again and again. And then all of a sudden you're just like, fine. I don't care what you do. But that's a lie because you actually do care. And then them doing that thing is 10 times more annoying, right? Or whatever it is. And then you cry, your kids cry because they're like, well, I really want to do it, but you're mad at me and you yelled. And so now I don't want to do it because I know that even though you gave me permission, you don't really want me to do it, right? This is us when we're trying to avoid conflict, right? This is what's happening internally. Right? We just say, oh, it's fine. It's fine. I'm just going to pretend like it's not there and it's totally fine. The problem is that's not true. It's still there. We still care and it's still creating ripple effects. Okay? Trying to pretend like you don't care about something doesn't erase the conflict. Okay? Now let's go back to the confrontation part of this. I think, again, as women, it's very wired in us, or we have a tendency to want to avoid confrontation. Again, it's important to note that it's simply because of the emotions that we have to face when we have the confrontation. It's uncomfortable. We might feel afraid. We might feel anxious. We might feel embarrassed. We might feel self-conscious. We might feel uncomfortable, and we want to avoid feeling uncomfortable. It's very natural. Our brain is wired to avoid discomfort. It's wired to avoid all negativity. And so it wants to avoid all of these negative emotions. So it thinks that in order to do that, it has to avoid the confrontation. But here's what I want to offer in this. Again, I have to give total credit to my sister because she's the one that showed me this, is that sometimes the conflict is not resolved without confrontation. Sometimes the conflict is only resolved through confrontation. Again, going back to the example of David and Goliath. If David doesn't confront Goliath, then the Philistines win. And the Hebrews, the Israelites, stay in bondage. Right? Without confrontation, then wars continue. Do you guys see this? If nobody stands up and fights back, if nobody confronts, then the other side always wins. Without standing up, then standing up is what is required sometimes in order to end the conflict. And maybe it doesn't always end in your favor, but sometimes it requires us stepping forward and doing the uncomfortable thing, even internally, in order for it to be resolved. Pretending like it's going to go away doesn't actually make it go away. You have to face it. This is why I work so much with my clients on this. The first 2 steps in my coaching program, the modules that I teach, step number 1 is awareness and step number 2 is acceptance. That's confrontation right there. It's facing thoughts, becoming aware and accepting thoughts and beliefs and emotions that you would rather just sweep under the rug. Things that you would rather not confront because of what you make them mean about yourself, because they're uncomfortable to see. It's kind of like trying to avoid looking in a mirror, which I did for years. I was really good at it, okay, because I didn't like the way that I looked physically, and I avoided looking in the mirror because I didn't like how I felt when I confronted myself. So I wanted to avoid it. There was an internal conflict. I didn't like the things that I thought about myself. I didn't like my body. I had a lot of very negative thoughts about my body. And yet I was in conflict with myself because I also was beating myself up for those thoughts, right? I was also very grateful for my body. And I just tried to convince myself that it was totally fine and it was okay. And I'm all right with what I look like. And I'm grateful for my body. And I have this amazing body that's healthy, that has given birth to all of these children. And I'm just really ungrateful. And I should be thinking better thoughts about myself, and I know that I'm a child of God, and blah, 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 right? There was this conflict. There was what I really thought, and then what I was telling myself I should think. That was the conflict. And every time I looked in the mirror, that conflict became a confrontation. Whereas most of the time, I tried to just sweep it under the rug by ignoring all of it. I just tried to ignore it. I just tried to avoid the mirror. I tried to avoid the thoughts that I had about myself, about my body. But that didn't make the conflict go away. The thoughts were still under there, under the surface, waiting for me, and they were festering and getting worse. Okay? It wasn't until I started confronting it that I was able to change it. It was the confrontation that created the result that I wanted. I had to look at it. I had to become aware of what I thought, and I had to accept it. I had to confront it. That's how I changed it. That's how I changed the things that I think about myself. That's how I became more confident in who I am and what I look like. That's how I became confident as a wife in my sexuality, in my relationship with my husband. I became confident because I was able to confront the things that I didn't like about myself. That's what this is all about. So ladies, I want to offer that you guys look at your life. Where are you in conflict? Both internally and externally. Where are you in conflict with another human? And where are you in conflict internally with yourself? And then I want to offer that you consider confrontation Again, not necessarily fighting, not necessarily arguing, but a confrontation, even internally, in order to resolve it. Some conflict you might want to keep, some conflict takes a little bit longer. But if you never confront the conflict, it stays. Then the Philistines just stay. They were there for over a month. Did you guys know this? Before David fought Goliath, I think it was Goliath. I think you guys don't quote me on this. I am not a biblical historian, okay? But I think they were there for over a month, and every single day Goliath would come out and he would challenge the Israelites to send someone out to fight him, and they wouldn't do it. He was there for over a month. The conflict stayed. It wasn't until the confrontation, it wasn't until David said, I will fight you, and he went and fought, that it was resolved. Okay? The conflict doesn't go away when we pretend that it's not there. We have to confront it. And ladies, you guys are stronger than you think. And here's the most amazing part is especially with internal conflict, you get to determine what the outcome is. You get to decide. You get to determine the way that it's going to go. You can decide ahead of time how you want this thing to be resolved, and then you steer it in that direction. Okay? One of the things that's scary about conflict, or our brain thinks is scary about conflict, is that we think that there's an unknown end result, right? And sometimes that's totally true, especially if it involves another person. But with internal conflict, I want to offer this, is that it doesn't always have to be that way. When I confronted the thoughts that I had about myself, I wanted a specific end result, and I used the process that I teach my clients in order to create it. I am very happy with the way that my body looks right now. Did you guys know this? It's like uncomfortable that I like the way that I look, because I've never, at least in my awareness of my brain since I was 12, liked the way that I looked. Isn't this bizarre? It's so crazy. But I wanted that to be my outcome. And now that I knew how to manage my brain and manage my emotions, I knew how to make it happen, and I did. Ladies, it's not rocket science, but it is a specific process that you can do to resolve conflict and create the result that you want at the same time. So take a look at what's happening in your brain, at your life. Where are you in conflict? And does it require confrontation in order to have a resolution? And just remember that resolution can always be, especially if it's internal, can always be what you decide that you want ahead of time. Then you just have to figure out how to make it happen. That's the fun part. All right, ladies, go be David. Fight your Goliath. I love you all so much, and I'll see you guys next week on a brand new episode. So take care. All right, my ladies, if you enjoyed that podcast episode, you have to come join my coaching program. It is $2,500 for lifetime access to all of my online content and all of my coaching calls. Not only will you get one-on-one attention from me through coaching calls, you will also get to join this amazing community of women who are all working through this the exact same as you are. You'll also get 24/7 access to me through Slack, our private group messaging channel, and you will get access to all of the new material and content that I create. If you are ready to start applying everything that you've learned on the podcast and really take everything to the next level and start creating who you are as more than the porn addict's wife, I want to encourage you to come join my program today. Head to jolenewin.com, click on join, and you can join anytime. I can't wait to see you there.